start. Thanks very much for coming along. The topic of today's 15-minute forum is the vocabulary gap. Bit of a disclaimer, I think I definitely don't feel as though I'm an expert on this topic, and in fact there's probably other people here who are more of an expert on this topic. So really the purpose of this is to hopefully provoke a bit of a conversation about vocabulary and about what we can do to reduce the vocabulary gap. My interest in this topic really stemmed from the Staff Room podcast that Jamie and Michael and Tessa have been involved in with Alex Quigley. So if you are interested in this topic, that's a great place to start. And he's also written a book which I've read bits and pieces of, which is called Closing the Vocabulary Gap. So what is meant by vocabulary? Vocabulary is a body of words used in a particular language, and vocabulary growth is incidental, and there's not a great deal we can do about the students who come to us in Year 7, because vocabulary is something that is incidental and it happens primarily outside of the classroom, and that quote there just reinforces that many students are unfortunately disadvantaged because they speak a lot fewer words as children. So communication in the home is really important in terms of building vocabulary, and from an early age, I suppose the vocabulary gap is very evident, and it's very clear that some students are very disadvantaged when it comes to this, and some of these students are students who come to us in Year 7. So this quote really sums it up. The word rich get richer, while the word poor get poorer in their reading skills. And I really like this quote. I won't try and pronounce his name, but the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. And that's very evident, even for some of our students at Corpus, in all year groups, but particularly the students I've noticed in Year 7 who are disadvantaged because of their limited vocabulary. So, as a Catholic school, as a teacher, we're interested in social justice. We're interested in equality of opportunity and about fairness. So, I think we're interested in closing that gap and in helping those students who do struggle with their vocabulary, because as we know, it limits their ability to succeed in life, and it limits their ability to succeed in the classroom. And vocabulary is really essential, and it's a key proxy for success. So those students who from an early age have a limited vocabulary are disadvantaged in many ways, and that quote reinforces that children with a restricted vocabulary at 5 years old, not only do they struggle in the classroom, but often they struggle with higher unemployment rates, they struggle with mental health issues. So that really kind of stuck out for me. On the other hand, those students who are word rich and have a quite extensive vocabulary, they often are able to achieve a lot of success at school, and they are often able to do the things that we expect from students. So to read, to write, to listen, to speak effectively, but also to have a greater knowledge of the material that we teach. And one of the challenges with vocabulary, and this is a quote from Alex Quigley from his book, that vocabulary is hidden in plain sight. And I think that this was definitely clear to me that I hadn't necessarily, for a lot of my teaching career, hadn't really focused on this too much. I just expected or assumed that students knew a lot of the words that I expected them to know. Once I listened to that podcast and I started thinking about it a lot more, it became a lot clearer to me that there are students who really are struggling with their vocabulary, and it just really became a lot clearer to me. And I did have a bit of a light bulb moment, which I've spoken to some people about, which was when I got Year 7 Pilotti to read aloud. And it's probably changed my whole attitude to getting kids to actually read aloud in class, because it was fairly early in the year and I just expected her to read a couple of sentences. She really struggled with that, to the point where, I had to sort of take over from her. So she'd been able to hide that pretty effectively in the first couple of weeks. I don't know if anyone teaches Grace, but she's a really lovely kid. She's probably achieving C's, and there was nothing identified from on sector in terms of learning needs, but it was clear that she had a limited vocabulary. And now that I'm aware of that, I sort of regularly will sit with her and we'll read through passages and so on, and it's really clear that she struggles to pronounce many words, struggles to understand the meaning of many words. Reading's not an enjoyable task. She really lacks fluency in reading. It's a very stop-start process, and she'll find ways of avoiding reading. And she's become quite skilled at that, so you might not notice it. It's hidden in plain sight. And this is affecting her ability at school. This is affecting her ability to write, to express herself, to show her full level of understanding. She's coping, but she's not achieving the sort of success that she could if she had a greater vocabulary. And I like this quote from Alex Quigley: "Word-poor students are left unable to describe their world." I suppose that might also relate to pastoral matters. So students who have a limited vocabulary might not necessarily be able to describe the way they behaved or express the way they feel, and that might affect their behaviour as well. But these are some of the characteristics of word-poor students. So they're not building that mental model. They're struggling to comprehend information. They're struggling to understand or decode questions. So often that's a problem that we've identified, that students aren't reading the question or understanding the question, and that's affecting their ability to answer the question. And one of the challenges is this transition to high school that we're aware of. Between year 6 and year 7, school becomes very different. Students are all of a sudden expected to read more. The text that we get them to read are more challenging. The words become more sophisticated. Those who are word strong and have a really extensive vocabulary, they flourish, but students who don't have that often will struggle. And I've got an example here from the Year 7 Humanities textbook that we use, and this is from Term 1. So I suppose at the start of the year I would have expected that students would be able to read this without too many problems. But if you look at some of the words on there, words like infrastructure, words like even civil unrest, words like provision, intolerable, these are words that most of my students in Year 7 didn't know. And even I've got a really bright Year 11 economics acceleration class. Students didn't know the meaning of those words in red there, and so there's some really good sort of economics journalism that I get my kids to read, like articles about the current economy, but they're not necessarily enjoying or understanding those articles because they're not able to understand what those words mean. And so this is from the book, and it shows what reading is like for a lot of our students. So I think 25% of the words there are sort of blacked out. That's what it's like for a lot of our students. And Alex Quigley says that in order to be able to comprehend something and to understand the meaning of say a paragraph, students need to understand 95% of the words, but often they're well below that. And one of the challenges that we have as teachers is curse of knowledge, because we're word rich, we've got a really large vocabulary, we've got a strong knowledge of our topic, so being able to understand the challenges that our kids face with vocabulary can be quite difficult. So what we really need to do is look at this from the perspective of a novice. A lot of our students are novices in terms of their knowledge and in terms of their vocabulary, so we need to be aware of that. So then the question is, how do we close this gap? And Alex Quigley talks a lot about starting with curriculum. We know how important pedagogy is, but curriculum's important as well. So you need to actually plan for the fact that a lot of students are word poor, so plan for vocabulary. Have a think, and maybe this can be a good learning area meeting activity where you think about the key words for a particular unit of work. Or the key questions. What are the words that will frame this unit that we're constantly going to refer back to? What are some words that students typically have difficulty with? And which words do we have to explicitly teach? ultimately we want more words to stick in their long-term memory so they can then use them automatically. Okay, so we can't leave it to chance. We can't just assume that students will know certain words. We do need to actually, one of the key points to make is we need to actually explicitly teach this stuff. We need to break it down. We need to check that they understand it. We need to provide them with opportunities to retain that, so like low stakes quizzes and so on, but also using these words in our explanations, in our modelling, in our questions and so on, and then getting them to practice it, because he says that in order for them to retain a particular word that they've just learned, they need about 28 exposures to that word. So some strategies that I've used, one thing that I've done is for every lesson, for year 7s, I have included the key terminology on sector. So that's me thinking about, okay, what's the key words that the students will be exposed to today? I want to put that on sector so I'm aware of it. And also when I've got a teacher aide in the class, which I have twice in every 4 lessons, they're aware of it, so they can help students with that as well, including the key terms in the questions as well. Explicitly teaching them the meaning of particular words, and pronouncing it and getting them to actually to use them. And often I'll put these words on the board as well, so I'm aware of it and I'm using it. Getting them to actually write a sentence for each of these words, which they actually really enjoy, I've found. That's an opportunity for them to show their curiosity about words and to show their creativity in how they can use these words. And often they can be quite competitive in how they come up with a sentence relating to these words. Getting them to come up with like synonyms and antonyms as well, examples or explanations about key words. This is a website which I recommend, myfreebingocards.com. It'll create that for you, and you can use it as an activity where you read out definitions and they have to tick off the words as you go. Doing retrieval practice, like quizzes, for example, using a tool like Quizzes. Also, kids are really interested in this, morphology and etymology. So I had no idea what this meant about a year ago, but Alex Quigley talks about this a lot. So the morphology is like the root words, the parts of the words, and etymology is the history of the words. And that can actually help students to learn how to find other words in the future, become more word conscious. So that's an example there for democracy. Getting them to practice, so definitions, questions that include the key word, even drawing a picture, and then ultimately we want them to use these words in a paragraph. And Alex Quigley talks a lot about guided writing or guided reading. So this is an example. So I want my students to write a paragraph on democracy, and I want them to use those key words in their response. Yep. This is a structured reading activity. So these days, rarely would I just say to my kids, right, you're reading these 2 pages. I make it more structured. I want to know the words they're struggling with, and I also want them to think about, okay, what could be a good title, and also to summarise the information there. And also structured speaking activities. This is one that the Year 7s enjoy, where you give them a word and they have to speak about that word for a minute. They can't say they can't say you know, they can't pause for too long, they can't repeat the same point, and they can't sort of deviate off the topic. So if they can get to about 40 seconds, they've done really well. They need to think about their word choices, about using synonyms and so on. And then finally, how does it link to our pedagogical principles? First of all, I think in terms of connection, learning about the challenges that students face with vocabulary is one way of getting to know students, and checking for understanding is ways that we can connect with students. Students have a natural curiosity about words and want to know what words mean, so definitely links with curiosity. And as I said, they enjoy the challenge of actually learning new words and using new words and using these words in conversations, and I've encouraged them to sort of try and use these words in conversations at home, and I really praise them if they use these words in response to questions that I ask. And also challenging students with vocabulary, challenging them to broaden their vocabulary and use more sophisticated language. Okay, so happy to share this, and hopefully we can work together on closing the gap. Thanks a lot.